American TV network ABC has taken the late-night talk show host Jimmy Kimmel off-air indefinitely after comments he made about the death of the right-wing influencer Charlie Kirk.
He wasn't sidelined for a week. He was pulled indefinitely. One fiery monologue about the slaying of Charlie Kirk was all it took for Jimmy Kimmel to find himself shut out of his own stage. ABC announced Jimmy Kimmel Live was off the air after threats from the FCC, sparking shockwaves across Hollywood and beyond. So was this a case of censorship cloaked as corporate caution, or consequence culture taken to extremes? Tonight, we uncover why Kimmel was never allowed back, at least not yet. The fuse was lit. It began on a Monday night like any other, with Jimmy Kimmel stepping onto the stage, his trademark smirk in place, ready to dive into the day's chaos. But this wasn't a typical night of punchlines about celebrity gaffes or awkward political blunders. Instead, he zeroed in on the death of conservative activist Charlie Kirk, a story already pulsing through headlines and social feeds. And Kimmel didn't mince words. According to the transcript, he accused Trump's allies of trying to characterize this kid who assassinated Charlie Kirk as anything other than one of them, and doing everything they can to score political points from it. The delivery was biting, sharp, and deliberately mocking. Viewers familiar with Kimmel's monologues know he's no stranger to political digs, but this one landed differently. The tone was less tongue-in-cheek and more pointed, framing the narrative around Kirk's slaying as a cynical tool wielded by the MAGA movement. For some, it was late night doing what it has always done, commenting on the absurdities of power. For others, it was crossing a line, turning tragedy into satire. By Wednesday, ABC dropped a statement that sent shockwaves through the media world. Jimmy Kimmel Live will be preempted indefinitely. The language was sterile, almost corporate, but the implications were brutal. There was no return date, no clear roadmap. Just a curtain pulled down without warning. Inside newsrooms, editors scrambled. Was this cancellation, suspension, or a temporary cooling-off period dressed up in vague PR language? The timing made it murkier still. Hours earlier, Nexstar Media Group, the largest owner of local television stations in the U.S., announced it would no longer air Kimmel's show across its ABC affiliates. Their reasoning was blunt. Kimmel's remarks were offensive and insensitive at a critical time in our national political discourse. And Nexstar wasn't alone. Sinclair Broadcast Group, another broadcasting powerhouse, quickly followed suit, yanking Jimmy Kimmel Live from its lineups in 30 markets. Sinclair went a step further, declaring it would air a remembrance special for Charlie Kirk during Kimmel's usual slot, while demanding Kimmel issue an apology and even make a donation to Kirk's family and Turning Point USA. To understand the weight of those moves, you have to look at the fragile ecosystem of late-night television. A host may work for ABC, but the show's distribution depends on a patchwork of affiliates, station owners like Nexstar and Sinclair, who can choose whether or not to carry programming in their local markets. When those giants signal they're out, it isn't just a symbolic protest. It's a blackout. Suddenly, millions of viewers who might otherwise tune in never even see the show. Advertisers, wary of controversy, don't want their spots running in hostile markets. Executives, already fielding calls from regulators, see the dominoes falling and rush to cut their losses. That's what makes this moment feel less like a one-off suspension and more like a test case in the politics of distribution. A BC could weather criticism of a monologue. But when affiliates revolt, the network's leverage evaporates. The calculus shifts from defending a star host to safeguarding national carriage and billion-dollar advertising pipelines. The fuse had been lit, and the blast radius was expanding. Yet the outrage didn't start in a boardroom. It started in Washington. The pressure pipeline. If affiliate blackouts set the fuse, Washington provided the spark. At the center of the storm was Brendan Carr, the chair of the Federal Communications Commission. Just hours before ABC announced its decision, Carr had gone public with a warning. If ABC did not address Kimmel's comments about Charlie Kirk, the FCC was prepared to take action against the network. Coming from the nation's top broadcast regulator, it wasn't just a casual remark. It was a signal carrying both legal weight and symbolic pressure. Technically, ABC is a private network with the right to program as it chooses. But in practice, every network's business model depends on broadcast licenses. Those licenses flow through the FCC. When the chair himself threatens to review them, even hypothetically, it introduces a chilling effect. Media law experts were quick to point out that Carr's language blurred the line between oversight and interference. They noted that while the First Amendment protects broadcasters from government censorship, the very mention of taking action from a regulator can prompt executives to self-censor rather than risk a fight with Washington. That's why observers said this wasn't simply about one monologue. It was about saber-rattling, regulatory pressure combined with affiliate unrest. Executives at Disney, ABC's parent company, suddenly faced a dilemma: dig in behind their host and risk a drawn-out regulatory battle, or move swiftly to contain the controversy. As Politico reported, these situations often push companies to act first, review later, prioritizing the appearance of compliance over defending creative independence. In practice, that meant shelving Kimmel before lawyers and lobbyists could even map out what Carr's action might actually entail. The optics made the calculus even more complicated. Within hours of ABC's announcement, former President Donald Trump praised the suspension, framing it as accountability for what he called lies about Kirk's death. To Trump and his allies, this wasn't censorship, it was consequence culture. On the other side, critics from across the spectrum accused the administration of weaponizing regulatory power. Former President Barack Obama warned that Trump's use of agencies to silence media voices took interference to a new and dangerous level. House Democrats even called on Carr to resign, saying he had disgraced his office by bullying a private company into disciplining a comedian. What made the clash so potent is that both sides claimed to be defending the First Amendment. Conservatives argued that free speech doesn't shield broadcasters from accountability when their words offend millions. Progressives and free press advocates countered that government threats are precisely what the Constitution is designed to prevent, regardless of how offensive the underlying speech may be. The collision turned one late-night monologue into a referendum on the boundaries of expression in America. For ABC executives, the political noise was more than just headlines. Every statement from Washington amplified the perception that keeping Kimmel on air could jeopardize their standing with regulators and advertisers alike. The result was a perfect storm. Affiliate boycotts from Nexstar and Sinclair, a regulatory threat from Carr, and partisan framing from Trump and his opponents. Together, these factors made the network's decision look less like a matter of editorial discretion and more like a political calculation under duress. While Washington parsed legal lines and constitutional claims, another group was preparing to make its voice heard. This time, it wasn't lawyers or lawmakers, it was Hollywood. Hollywood erupts. The boardrooms were busy with damage control, but the loudest reaction came from the stage and the street. Within hours of ABC's announcement, Jimmy Kimmel's peers in late-night television lined up behind him. Stephen Colbert, Jon Stewart, Jimmy Fallon, and Seth Meyers all spoke out on their shows and social media, framing the suspension not as a disciplinary matter, but as an attack on creative freedom. David Letterman, the elder statesman of the format, took the sharpest tone, calling it managed media and warning that bowing to political pressure would touch everyone eventually. That kind of solidarity among late-night rivals is rare. Normally, hosts compete for ratings, for buzz, for the next viral clip. But here, they dropped the rivalry and drew a bright line. Suspending a comedian over a political monologue was censorship by another name. While the hosts used monologues, Hollywood unions brought megaphones. Members of the Writers Guild of America, SAGAFTRA, and the American Federation of Musicians gathered outside Disney headquarters and ABC Studios in Burbank, carrying signs that read, "Defend Free Speech" and "ABC Bends the Knee." They were joined by local activist groups marching down Alameda Boulevard to the sound of honking car horns. For many writers and performers, this wasn't just about Jimmy Kimmel. It was about the precedent. If one host could be silenced after political pressure, then every comedy room in America could feel that chill. Union leaders made that point loud and clear. What happened wasn't simply corporate discipline. It was capitulation to outside pressure, and it risked gutting one of comedy's oldest roles, pushing against power. The protests weren't contained to unions either. Fans carried homemade signs, quoting parts of Kimmel's monologue, while others came dressed as television hosts, holding duct tape across their mouths. The symbolism was clear. A late-night host had been gagged, and by extension, so had they. Some protesters referenced Disney's own Star Wars shows, pointing out that the company profited from stories about fighting authoritarianism while allegedly silencing dissent in real life. That irony became one of the rallying cries of the demonstrations. It didn't stop there. LGBTQ+ communities added their voices, pointing out that Kimmel has long been outspoken in support of queer rights and equality. For them, his suspension felt personal, a punishment not just for words about Charlie Kirk, but for a broader tradition of speaking up for marginalized voices. Prominent showrunners and queer comedians framed the suspension as a flashpoint in the ongoing fight for creative autonomy. They argued that if executives could muzzle Kimmel under political pressure, it sent a chilling message to writers and performers who rely on their platforms to address injustice, identity, and power. The outpouring of support on social media reflected that, with hashtags linking the controversy to broader struggles for speech and visibility. That made the moment bigger than Jimmy Kimmel. What started as one late-night monologue turned into a labor issue, a cultural issue, and a political issue all at once. Comedians and writers reminded the public that comedy has always been a tool for challenging authority, from Lenny Bruce to George Carlin to more modern satirists. The fear was that this suspension might mark a turning point where networks begin to weigh political convenience more heavily than tradition, risk, or art. But this story isn't just about who sits behind the desk. It's also about who gets invited into the guest chair and who never does again. Bookers, bands, and the chair. Behind every late-night broadcast is a small army of bookers. Their job looks glamorous on the surface, lining up celebrities, comedians, and newsmakers for the coveted couch. But the reality is far more cautious and calculated. A guest slot isn't just a 5-minute plug for a new movie. It's a business decision. Publicists pitch talent as part of promotional cycles. Studios align appearances with release dates. And networks assess whether a guest fits the tone of the show at that moment. And while the host's personality often sets the stage, it's the bookers who weigh the risks. When a segment goes off the rails, whether through profanity, a political outburst, or just sheer chaos, it doesn't always lead to a formal ban. Instead, most networks rely on no-return notes. These are quiet memos circulated within the booking team, flagging that a particular guest is too unpredictable or problematic to invite back soon. In practice, it's less about punishment and more about risk management. Advertisers don't want their commercials airing right after a meltdown. Affiliates don't want complaints from viewers. So the easiest way to keep things clean is to quietly close the guest chair. This practice has deep roots. In Johnny Carson's era, the calculus was far more personal. Carson's nod, or his silence, was the ultimate arbiter. If he disliked a performance, or felt a guest overstepped, that person might never see the Tonight Show stage again. Stories of impressionists or comedians quietly disappearing from Carson's lineup became part of industry lore. It was an informal blacklist, enforced not by policy, but by the host's whim. In those days, one man's smile or his grudge could dictate a career's trajectory. Today, the system has shifted. With corporate oversight and a 24/7 media cycle, bans are less about personal ego and more about brand safety. A guest who delivers a performance that sparks backlash can set off a chain reaction. Trending hashtags, advertiser pullouts, affiliate concerns, and political noise. The result is the same as Carson's cold shoulder, but the mechanism is different. Instead of a host whispering "never again," it's a matrix of executives, PR handlers, and ad sales teams calculating the cost of another invite. That's why Kimmel's suspension is more than just a headline about one man. It supercharges the entire booking process. If a network is willing to pull its own host off the air after one monologue, what does that signal to guests? The chair suddenly looks less safe, less predictable. Publicists may hesitate to pitch talent for fear that association with a controversy could splash back on their client. Bookers may second-guess inviting guests known for political candor, improvisational stunts, or unpredictable humor. The ripple effect is chilling. When the host isn't secure, no one in the studio is. Industry veterans say this moment may accelerate a broader trend. Late night has already grown more cautious in recent years, as advertisers have become quicker to react to social media flare-ups. The days of unfiltered appearances are fading, replaced by pre-interviews, stricter outlines, and tighter guardrails. Now, with the Kimmel suspension looming over every green room, the fear is that booking decisions will lean even harder toward the safest choices. A-list stars with vetted talking points, sanitized anecdotes, and little risk of saying something that could spark the next wave of outrage. The irony, of course, is that the very moments that made late-night legendary often came from risk. An unscripted joke, a bold confession, a confrontation that no one saw coming. Carson built his mythology on the idea that anything could happen when you sat in that chair. Kimmel, like his peers, has kept that tradition alive. But when the system treats unpredictability as a liability rather than an asset, the show itself changes. The chair stops being a stage for spontaneity and becomes a platform for only the safest voices. Which brings us to the legal and business math. A BC actually faces the dollars, contracts, and consequences that drive every decision when a controversy explodes. Network math, risk versus rights. Inside ABC's corporate offices, the conversation around Jimmy Kimmel's suspension wasn't framed in terms of the First Amendment. Networks don't speak the language of free speech. They speak the language of liability, brand safety, and contracts. Standards and practices departments exist to anticipate trouble before it happens. And when a monologue like Kimmel's triggers headlines, those departments shift into overdrive. The official line from ABC was that Jimmy Kimmel Live had been preempted, but the internal justifications were more layered. Affiliate agreements jeopardized by blackouts, advertiser hesitancy, and the possibility of regulatory fallout. From that perspective, the suspension was less about conceding to politics and more about protecting the network's business model. Still, it's impossible to separate those calculations from the political context. The FCC chair's public threat to take action, followed by affiliates like Nexstar and Sinclair dropping the show, meant executives had to factor in not just whether viewers were offended, but whether licenses and carriage contracts could be at stake. That's why trade analysts describe the move as corporate risk management in real time. To ABC, pulling Kimmel wasn't about endorsing censorship, it was about avoiding a cascade of losses that could spread across the entire Disney portfolio. But this is where the chilling effect sets in. Other hosts and writers looked at the Kimmel episode as a warning shot. If one of the most established names in late night could be silenced over a single monologue, What does that mean for the creative process? Writers' rooms thrive on pushing boundaries, experimenting with satire, and testing material that may or may not land. Now, every edgy line comes with the shadow of potential suspension. Colbert, Stewart, Fallon, and Myers all made public statements not just in solidarity with Kimmel, but to mark a boundary. They argued that if networks cave under pressure once, it becomes easier to demand the same again. Their red line wasn't only about Jimmy Kimmel, it was about defending the creative space they all depend on. This tension highlights the clash between art and commerce in modern television. On one hand, networks rely on late-night hosts to generate buzz, cultural commentary, and viral clips that keep them relevant. On the other, the same edgy commentary that builds cultural clout can spook advertisers and affiliates. That balance has always been delicate, but Kimmel's suspension made it brutally clear. In a corporate showdown, business wins. The pathway back for a host in this position usually follows a predictable playbook. First comes the cooling-off period, with reruns or guest hosts filling the slot. Then, depending on how public sentiment shifts, the network may float trial balloons about the host's return, often coupled with an apology or a clarification framed as regret for distraction. If advertisers are reassured and affiliates agree to carry the show again, negotiations can clear the way for reinstatement. In some cases, format tweaks or additional oversight are introduced to signal change without forcing a total overhaul. But the protests and union demonstrations complicate that process. Public anger over Kimmel's removal has kept the story alive, making it harder for ABC to quietly reinstate him with a press release and a half-hearted apology. Writers, actors, and comedians have already staked their reputations on calling this censorship. For ABC, walking back the decision risks looking like they admitted to buckling under political pressure in the first place. And for Kimmel himself, returning under stricter conditions could look like a defeat. This leaves the network in an uncomfortable limbo. Every day that passes without Kimmel on air erodes the show's visibility, while the debate over free speech grows louder outside the studio gates. ABC may have acted quickly to contain risk, but now they face a different equation: how to end the suspension without deepening the backlash. Still, the loudest accelerant in this firestorm wasn't Hollywood or ABC boardrooms, it was politics. When politics enters the studio. When Jimmy Kimmel's monologue sparked backlash, the fight quickly left the studio lights behind and landed squarely in the halls of power. Former President Donald Trump was among the first to seize the moment. He praised ABC's decision to pull Kimmel off the air, framing the late-night host's comments not as comedy or commentary, but as a violation of truth itself. In Trump's telling, this wasn't free speech, it was malicious speech, and suspension was the appropriate remedy. That argument drew cheers from his base, but struck directly at the heart of press freedom norms. For decades, American tradition has drawn a bright line. The government doesn't decide what qualifies as legitimate speech, no matter how offensive or biased. Trump's framing blurred that boundary, recasting a late-night monologue as something punishable rather than protected. Even some conservatives raised alarms about that approach. Media lawyers and commentators pointed out that while networks are private companies with broad discretion, the spectacle of a former president and an FCC chair pressuring a broadcaster looked like state interference. A handful of conservative free speech advocates warned that if government figures celebrate silencing comedians today, the same tools could be used against their allies tomorrow. That rare split inside the conservative camp underscored how fraught this episode had become. It wasn't just about left versus right, but about the very principles underpinning American media. Democrats, meanwhile, escalated the response. Several House leaders called on FCC Chair Brendan Carr to resign, accusing him of abusing his office by threatening action against ABC. They argued that even the suggestion of license review was enough to chill expression across the industry. Former President Barack Obama echoed that warning, saying the Trump administration had taken interference to a new and dangerous level, normalizing regulatory threats against companies that displeased the White House. For Obama and others, the issue wasn't whether Kimmel's joke was tasteful or not. It was the precedent that comedians, reporters, or anyone with a microphone could be silenced by the hint of regulatory reprisal. This bipartisan tension exposed a deeper cultural shift. Audiences now expect late-night television to be political. Long gone are the days when hosts filled their monologues with jokes about celebrities' weather and the occasional presidential gaffe. Today, politics is baked into the format. Viewers tune in not just for laughs, but for commentary, whether it's Colbert dissecting congressional hearings or Kimmel weighing in on voting rights. That expectation makes too hot segments inevitable. The line between entertainment and political critique has blurred, and as long as audiences reward candor, hosts will continue to push into controversial territory. That reality makes the Kimmel suspension even more precarious. ABC and its affiliates may want to keep late-night light, but viewers increasingly demand relevance. They expect their hosts to weigh in on shootings, protests, scandals, and elections. When networks shy away from those topics, audiences often turn elsewhere, to streaming platforms, podcasts, or comedians who aren't bound by the same advertiser and affiliate constraints. By suspending Kimmel for doing what audiences now anticipate, ABC risks not only political fallout, but also cultural irrelevance. The irony is that late night has always been political in its own way. Johnny Carson delivered monologues full of political jokes, though wrapped in gentler tones. Jay Leno skewered presidents and scandals alike. What's changed is the intensity of polarization and the immediacy of social media, where every punchline is clipped, shared, and litigated in real time. That amplification guarantees that sooner or later, another host will spark another firestorm. The only question is whether networks will stand by them or retreat into safer, thinner comedy that avoids the very issues audiences expect to see tackled. The clash over Jimmy Kimmel's suspension isn't just about one man or one show. It's about whether late-night comedy can still function as a space for political critique in a climate where jokes double as political acts. Washington has already shown it's willing to intervene. Hollywood has shown it won't stay quiet, and the viewers themselves, divided, vocal, and politically charged, are demanding more, not less, from the comedians they trust at the end of the day. So does Kimmel come back? Or does late night change first? What happens next? With Jimmy Kimmel off the air, speculation has turned from why it happened to what comes next. Industry insiders sketch out three possible scenarios, each with its own advantages and pitfalls. The first is swift reinstatement. In this version, ABC brings Kimmel back within weeks, framing the hiatus as a cooling-off period. The network could pair his return with subtle editorial guardrails, perhaps closer oversight of monologues, tighter coordination with standards and practices, or an internal promise to avoid certain hot-button topics. The upside is speed. The controversy fades, ratings, stability returns, and advertisers breathe easier. The downside is optics. Bringing Kimmel back too quickly risks looking like the suspension was a token gesture, undermining both the network's credibility and Kimmel's reputation for independence. It also sets a precedent that future controversies can be smoothed over with a brief timeout, even when deeper tensions remain unresolved. The second scenario is a phased return. ABC could continue airing guest hosts or reruns while quietly renegotiating terms with affiliates and advertisers. Kimmel might then reappear gradually, perhaps in a softened format with lighter monologues or more pre-taped sketches. This approach spreads out risk, allowing the network to gauge public reaction in real time. The advantage is control. ABC can test the waters, keeping leverage with affiliates who are still wary of backlash. But the drawbacks are obvious. A phased return diminishes Kimmel's authority. The very idea that he needs to be reintroduced like a controversial guest undercuts the power of his desk. Audiences could see it as a demotion, and Kimmel himself might resist returning under half measures. The third possibility is the most dramatic: a prolonged standoff. If ABC doubles down on caution, the suspension could stretch for months, forcing viewers toward other late-night options, or away from broadcast entirely. In this case, the show risks losing cultural relevance, ceding ground to Fallon, Colbert, or Stewart, or even to digital native voices on YouTube and podcasts. The advantage is safety for the network. By waiting out the storm, ABC avoids immediate political heat. The danger is long-term decay. Once audiences find alternatives, they rarely come back, and advertisers follow them. This is the nightmare scenario: a brand damaged not by controversy itself, but by absence. Whatever path ABC chooses, ripple effects will spread far beyond Kimmel's desk. Booking departments across late night are already tightening their filters. Producers are weighing the risk of political guests, fiery comedians, or unpredictable stunts. Joke vetting is likely to intensify, with monologues combed over by lawyers before airtime. Writers, however, have signaled they won't take this lying down. The protests outside Disney made clear that comedy rooms view Kimmel's suspension as an existential issue. Many writers will push back against heavier oversight, framing it as a betrayal of the very purpose of late-night satire. That tension between corporate caution and creative rebellion could define the industry's next phase. The audience, though, remains the wild card. Ratings, viral clips, and advertiser sentiment, not just politics, will ultimately decide whether Jimmy Kimmel Live returns unchanged. If viewers tune out in protest, ABC may have no choice but to reinstate Kimmel quickly. If audiences drift to competitors or online comedians, the network may be forced to reinvent its format altogether. Advertisers, watching closely, will move wherever the audience goes. That reality could end up carrying more weight than all the political debates in Washington. And hovering over all of this is the symbolic power of Kimmel's return. However it happens, his first monologue back will be scrutinized line by line, joke by joke. Will he address the controversy head-on, cracking a joke about censorship? Will he deflect with humor, or deliver a serious reflection on free speech and late night's role in it? That opening moment will set the tone, not just for his show, but for how late night as a whole responds to the balance of comedy, politics, and pressure. If you're invested in free expression and in comedy that actually risks something, stick with us. Like, comment, subscribe, and tell us, should ABC reinstate Kimmel immediately, or did the monologue cross a line? And when you're done here, watch the next video on your screen for more deep dives into the stories shaping late night and the limits of what you're allowed to say on it.